Painting flowers is more than just capturing their beauty. It's about creating a compelling composition that draws the eye and evokes emotion. Hi, I'm Louise De Masi, and in this video I'll show you how to arrange 2 zoomed-in roses to create a dynamic, balanced composition. We'll explore diagonal placement, contrast, and subtle tricks to guide your viewer's eye across the painting. Whether you're new to florals or looking to improve your compositions, stay tuned for tips that will transform your flower paintings. Have you ever finished a painting, looked at it, and felt underwhelmed? Sometimes it's not the colours or technique, it's the composition that's missing that wow factor. In this video, I want to walk you through the key compositional choices I made while painting these roses. And I'll show you how small changes can make a big impact on your artwork. First, I'll talk about the arrangement of the flowers on the paper, and then I'll talk about the techniques I used when I was painting. I'm sure you've heard of the rule of thirds. It's a common compositional guideline that divides your canvas into a grid of 9 equal parts with 2 horizontal and 2 vertical lines. You'll see it on your iPhone when you use the camera. The idea is to place your focal point or key elements along these lines or at their intersections to create a more balanced and engaging composition. In this painting, I used that principle by placing the focal rose slightly off center and aligning the second rose along the left third. This not only makes the composition feel more natural, but also helps lead the viewer's eye through the painting. When you paint 2 flowers, consider overlapping them slightly. Overlapping not only creates a sense of depth, but also helps direct the viewer's eye through the composition. The front flower becomes the focal point, while the one behind adds context and layers to the piece, making the painting feel more dynamic. It's a simple way to add dimension and keep your composition visually interesting without being too busy. With this rose painting, I've also angled the flowers diagonally across the paper, which adds a sense of movement and flow to the composition. Diagonals naturally guide the viewer's eye, making the arrangement feel more dynamic and visually interesting. The background shapes or the negative spaces around the roses play a crucial role in the composition as well. These shapes help define the roses and give them more impact. By being mindful of the contours created by the petals and the background, I've added balance and structure to the design. The subtle, soft shapes in the background also help the flowers stand out while keeping the composition harmonious and uncluttered. Alright, so those are some of the key things I thought about while planning the composition. But once I started painting, there were even more things to think about. I want to talk about that now, but before I do, I'd like to thank Skillshare for sponsoring this video. I'm interested in learning about photography because it helps me compose my paintings. I often use techniques that photographers rely on to create strong compositions in their photos. If you'd like to explore this further, I recommend checking out Craig Whitehead's class on Skillshare called Street Photography Composition: 5 Techniques for Standout Photos. Craig is a street photographer who shares 5 key composition techniques that can easily be applied to painting. His tips on how to guide the viewer's eye can help you take your own compositions to the next level. If you haven't heard of Skillshare, it's an online learning platform perfect for creative people like us. They have thousands of classes taught by professionals covering everything from illustration and design to productivity, photography, and lots more. If you're looking to pick up new skills or you want to explore new techniques and grow as an artist, it's the place to be. I've found a lot of inspiring classes on there on subjects I'm interested in that have really helped me grow. Skillshare has created a new and improved class system, including smarter class categories, 3 new class topics, creative careers, creative inspiration, and AI and innovation. And you also have the ability to find classes by software and material. If you're interested in learning watercolour, I've put together 14 classes on Skillshare that cover different techniques and subjects I think you'll enjoy. They will help you get more comfortable with painting and explore new ideas. Plus, there are loads of other great painting classes by different teachers too, so there's plenty to dive into for practice and inspiration. If you haven't checked out Skillshare yet, now's a great time. The first 500 people to use my link in the description will get a 1-month free trial, so it's a perfect time to jump in and see how it can help you grow your skills and explore new passions. Okay, now let's dive into the painting process of the roses and see how it all came together. This is my reference photo of some roses from my garden. I made a file in Photoshop the same size as the watercolour paper that I was going to use, and I zoomed in on the roses. I also tilted them slightly. I used a limited palette of just 4 schminker colours: ruby red, cerulean, transparent sienna, and Indian yellow. A limited palette is important because it helps create colour harmony throughout the painting, making everything feel more cohesive. It also simplifies the choices you have to make, allowing you to focus more on value and composition rather than juggling too many colours. I mixed ruby red with cerulean, and I used this colour mixture throughout most of the painting. I started by painting the second rose, which is the less dominant one. I started washing in all the shadow areas with softer, more subdued colours to keep it in the background. I deliberately used paler tones here because I wanted this rose to support the main flower without drawing too much attention. This creates a nice contrast, making the dominant rose stand out more when I add stronger colours later. When I washed in the petals on the main flower, I used the same colour, but I increased the pigment so the colours were slightly darker. I mixed some grey from cerulean and transparent sienna, and I used that at the base of some of the petals. I also added other colours to the washes for interest. This is ruby red on the damp paper. I washed in all the outer petals first using loose brush strokes to create a sense of movement. Laying down those big soft shapes early helped establish the flow of the composition. This set the tone for the painting, allowing it to develop that soft and romantic feel right from the beginning. Now let's talk about the focal point of the painting. When you're planning a composition, it's important to ask yourself where you want the viewer's eye to go. In this case, my focal point is the centre of the main rose. I've placed it just off-centre, following the rule of thirds for a more balanced composition. The focal point is where you want the most attention. So it's where you will want to put your strongest contrasts and your sharpest edges. Think of your focal point as the last donut in the box. Everyone's eye is on it. This is the area where I used my darkest colours and ruby red straight from the tube. For the deepest shadows, I mixed ruby red with cerulean to create a rich, dark tone. While I used wet paper for the outer petals to achieve soft, diffused edges, here in the focal point, I worked mostly on dry paper. The dry surface allowed me to create crisp, hard edges that naturally draw attention. I had to layer the paint a few times here to achieve the depth of colour that I wanted, whereas on the outer petals, I limited myself to just 1 or 2 washes. The first wash is always the freshest, so if I can get most of the work done in that initial layer, I aim to do so. Once I finished the centre of the main rose, I went back to the outer one to add a bit more detail. I didn't want it to be too detailed, just enough to give it some definition. I kept the colours soft, cooler, and muted so that it wouldn't draw attention away from the focal point. After I finish painting each flower, I like to brush clean water over the entire flower with a large brush. This lifts and blends a bit of the pigment, helping the flower feel more unified instead of looking like a collection of separate petals. It softens the edges and brings everything together, avoiding that disjointed look that can happen when you paint each petal individually. I took some artistic license and changed the background colour to blue instead of green because it gives more of an analogous colour scheme. The soft pinks and blues are close together on the colour wheel, which creates a nice sense of harmony and calm. It just felt like the right choice to keep the focus on the flowers while keeping the whole composition balanced and peaceful. I used cerulean on the roses, so to keep things harmonious, I added it to the background as well. I was worried that it was going to be too bright and I didn't want to overpower the roses, so to tone it down, I mixed in some transparent sienna, and I really liked the softer version. It felt like it worked well with the overall composition. I also wanted a touch of green, so I mixed my own. I used Indian yellow, which is a warm yellow, and I combined it with cerulean. I didn't want the green to be too bright, so that's why I went with the warm yellow instead of a cool yellow. I turned my painting upside down to paint the top section of the background. I worked on wet paper to keep paint edges soft. I painted the green on first, and then my blue mixture. When it comes to painting backgrounds, it's really up to you whether you do them first, last, or somewhere in between. It depends on the subject. For this painting, I chose to do the background last for two reasons. First, I knew I'd need to soften the edges of the roses by brushing some clean water over them, like I showed you earlier, and I didn't want to risk disturbing the background and dragging that colour onto the flowers. Second, since the background was darker than the roses, painting it last let me tidy up the edges of the roses as I went. So, to sum everything up, here are the key points to think about when planning your composition for a zoomed-in floral painting like this one. First, consider using the rule of thirds to place your focal point slightly off-centre for a balanced composition. Overlapping the elements, like these roses, can add depth and guide the viewer's eye through the painting. Diagonal placement creates movement. And paying attention to negative space helps define your subject. So have a look at the shapes made by the background. Don't forget that the negative space is an important part of the composition. When painting, try to use a limited palette to create harmony. It's important. And also focus on using contrast and sharp or hard edges to emphasize the focal point. Lastly, always think about how your background supports the main subject without overpowering it. Keep these things in mind and your floral paintings will feel more dynamic and cohesive. Thanks so much for watching. I hope these tips help you feel more confident when planning your own floral compositions. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and consider subscribing for more watercolour tutorials. Until next time, happy painting. It's the composition that misses that wow factor. That's missing.
Ask the question at the beginning. Say it again. Ask a question.
Do you want to do it?
Come on.
We'll
Do you want help or not?
swap places. So Dom's going to do the video today. I'm sure you've heard of the rule of divide your canvas into a grid of nine equal parts. 2 horizontal, 2 vertical. When you paint 2 flowers, consider overlapping them slightly. When you paint 2 flowers, consider overlapping them slightly. Was that weird?
Again. Do this, go. and overlap them. Just put one up at a time. Stop it.
Right. No. I'm going to do it again. I'll get it. I'll get it. I've added balance and structure to the design. I've added balance and structure to the design.
Again.
I've added balance and structure to the design. I've added balance and structure to the design. The subtle, soft shapes in the background also help the flowers stand out while keeping the composition harmonious and uncluttered. I did it. That can easily. His tips on how to